Hello everybody, Mr. Akins here and welcome to What's on the Comic Rack. In this video we're going back to 1982 and we're going to look at some of the comic books I have in my collection from 1982. So what was it like back in 1982? Well, if you were at the movie theater you might be watching Sylvester Stallone in First Blood.
Sylvester Stallone. This time he's fighting for his life. First Blood.
If you were watching TV and reading comics, then you were probably pretty interested in a brand new show that came out starring David Hasselhoff called Knight Rider.
Knight Rider.
In 1982, Saturday morning cartoons were still a thing, so I know I was getting up early to watch The Amazing Spider-Man and The Incredible Hulk.
The Incredible Hulk and the Amazing Spider-Man.
1982 also saw the release of one of my favorite songs from one of my favorite bands, that would be Rosanna by Toto. But what about comic books that were released that year? I'm going to show you 10 comic books in no particular order that are all cover dated 1982. I could have gotten these off the rack in 1982, I could have gotten them in the mail, or I may have gotten them years later by going in back bins. So, what was on the rack in 1982? Let's take a look. So, starting off in no particular order, Dazzler number 15 with a cover date of May 1982. Cover art by Bill Sienkiewicz of New Mutants fame. Now in this issue, Dazzler is looking for a mother and enlists the help of Jessica Drew to help find her. Dazzler and Spider-Woman end up in some type of S.H.I.E.L.D. training facility that's modeled after the X-Men's Danger Room, and that's what's being represented in this cover right here. I didn't pick this comic book up off the rack in 1982, but actually got it out of a collection I bought along with much of the Dazzler run. I actually only need a few comics to complete that run. One other thing about this comic, or the cover, is the fact that my wife actually said something about this cover. She said she really liked this cover, and she usually doesn't say anything about the covers of comic books I display in my room. I guess I need to note that Sienkiewicz is one of my wife's favorite comic book artists. Number 9 on the list, Silversurfer Volume 2. I think this has a cover date of June 1982. Cover art by John Byrne and Tom Palmer. Script by John Byrne and Stan Lee. While the Silversurfer had guest starred in other comics, it wasn't until this comic that someone other than Stan Lee wrote a solo Silversurfer series. John Byrne's artwork and Tom Palmer's inks are absolutely amazing in this book. I really love it. Everyone has their favorite artist and character, pair up. For me, my favorite Silversurfer artist is either John Buscema or John Byrne. Always thought Buscema's rendition of the Silversurfer in Volume 1 of his solo series was absolutely amazing.
Everybody that reads comic books knows that Kirby's Silversurfer is the only true Silversurfer. Now, am I right or wrong?
So, who's your favorite Silversurfer artist? Put it in the comment below. I also picked this book because it gives me an opportunity to plug a fellow YouTuber. That would be Brandon over at Mon Comics. Brandon graciously gifted me this slabbed copy of this book right here. I usually don't show slabs because of the glare. By some odd twist of fate, if you haven't subbed up Mon Comics, look for a link to his channel in the description below. Number 8 on our list, Iron Man number 158, also with a cover date of 1982. The cover art on this issue was done by Bob Layton. Speaking of artist pair-ups with characters, Bob Layton and John Romita Jr., those are my favorite Iron Man artists, and has done some of the absolute all-time favorite covers of Iron Man for me. I distinctly remember seeing this comic on the rack at a convenience store called Pick and Pay. It was down by the beach. The cover, combined with my love of Iron Man at the time, spurred me to pick it up, flip through it, and put it back on the rack. I guess there wasn't enough action on the inside for me, or it may have been the fact that there was no Bob Layton artwork on the inside. That was the reason I didn't pick it up and keep it. It was many years later before I actually picked up this comic book from the back bin somewhere. Number 7 on my list, Avengers number 222. Of course, cover date 1982. The plot, Jim Shooter, script, Stephen Grant, and Al Milgrom helped with this cover right here. From the previous issue, number 221, I did not miss a single issue of Volume 1 of the Avengers. It was a must-read for me. Now, this issue featured an odd team-up of the Masters of Evil that were formed by Egghead, a nemesis of Hank Pym. This incarnation of the Masters of Evil weren't formed by Byron Zemo. Now, at this point in the story, Hank Pym is currently incarcerated and encounters his former enemy, Whirlwind, who taunts Pym by saying, "Once I get out of here, I'm going to pay Jan, aka the Wasp, a special visit." The whole reason the Masters of Evil even encounter the Avengers is because Whirlwind attempts to fulfill this threat that he made while in prison. My favorite part of this issue is when the Masters of Evil hear thunder and state that there's not a single cloud in the sky right before Mjolnir flies in and lays waste to every single one of them. Number 6 on the list, ROM number 31. Cover date, of course, 1982. Another Al Milgrom cover, and the first cover appearance by Rogue right here, which a lot of people probably wouldn't recognize because of the way she looks on this cover. This issue is also the second appearance of Rogue. However, the reason I picked this up off the rack is it continued the story started in Avengers Annual number 10, which featured the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. I know that today continuity can be problematic with so much history, so many creative teams, and so many reboots, but in the 80s, continuity I felt was a strength of Marvel Comics. This book answered my question about what happened to the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants after Avengers Annual 10, and it didn't pretend that that story didn't happen or that it didn't matter. Number 5 on my list from 1982 is Contest of Champions number 1. This cover is one of my favorites and is done by Bob Layton and John Romita Jr. The writing duties, Mark Grunwald, Stephen Grant, Bill Mantlo. This is, I think, maybe one of the first limited series put out by Marvel and featured almost every single Marvel superhero. Speaking of continuity, this book is another example of what makes it great. It references other comics, but you don't have to have read those other comics to enjoy the story. All these heroes have been snatched from Earth to participate in a contest between the Grandmaster and a strange hooded figure. The stakes: if the Grandmaster wins, the life of his brother the Collector, who was slain during the Korvac saga in the Avengers, will be restored. But if the hooded figure wins, then the Grandmaster's life is forfeit. My 13-year-old mind was blown away by this story, which pitted hero against hero. The limited series also included character bios at the end of each issue, which was a precursor of the Handbook of the Marvel Universe. So let's take a look at those. So here's a look at Marvel Superheroes 1982. They have little bios telling you when their first appearances are and something about their powers, all in alphabetical order. And like I said, this was definitely a precursor to the official handbook of the Marvel Universe. Now, Contest of Champions number 1 also has a lot of first appearances in it. It has first appearances by characters such as Blitzkrieg, Defensor, the Collective Man, Shamrock, just to name a few. There's a lot of first appearances in this book. So the question for those people who have read this limited series, there's actually a mistake made in this series, which was only 3 issues in total. Does anyone know what the mistake was? If you do, put it in the comments below. Number 4 on the list, another book from 1982, Hercules number 1. Another limited series from Marvel. Cover, writing, and inks by Bob Layton, another one of my favorite artists. Before this limited series, I had picked up a reprint of Avengers number 45, where Hercules joins the Avengers. So I picked this book off the rack because I like the character and wanted to read more comics with this character in it. Just that simple. This happens to be the first appearance of the Recorder, a Rigelian robot that accompanies Hercules to record his adventures throughout the galaxy. This cover features Hercules in my favorite Hercules costume. Now, Hercules would later rejoin the Avengers again, and when this costume is destroyed, Hercules goes through a series of the most horrendous costumes in my opinion. Every issue I hoped that they would go back to this one, but they never did in Volume 1. This is another example of a well-read, well-loved comic. Look at that spine roll on that comic. Absolutely beautiful. Number 3 on the list from 1982 is an Incredible Hulk number 272. Amazing cover by Al Milgrom, and the interior covers are done by Sal Buscema, which is one of my favorite Hulk artists. I definitely remember picking this up at the grocery store back in 1982, going over to the magazine section of the store, looking at what they had and picking this book out. I was sure there was going to be a great fight in this book because look at the cover, and my 13-year-old self wanted some great comic book fights. I started becoming a regular reader of the Hulk with this issue, and I was definitely familiar with the character because of the comics. I'd seen him in other comics, but also because of the Lou Ferrigno, Bill Bixby Incredible Hulk TV series I watched as a kid. And this was kind of an odd place to pick up reading the Hulk, because in this issue, due to more gamma radiation exposure, Banner is actually able to transform into the Hulk while keeping his intelligence and personality. Now this aspect definitely kept me interested in reading the comic. I wanted to know where this story was going and what was going to happen next. Number 2 on the list of 1982 comics is Marvel Team Up number 124, cover by Ed Hannigan. Now Marvel Team Up at this time was my go-to for Spider-Man stories. I always picked up Marvel Team Up and Marvel 2-in-1 comics, but because basically who doesn't love a superhero team up? I just reread this book and I really enjoyed it. Now Beast has always been one of my favorite X-Men and one of my favorite Avengers, and his backstory is explored a little bit more in this issue. I'm not going to say too much about the story for this one because I want people to actually read this book. If you're an X-Men or a mutant fan, then you need to pick this book up and read this story just because of the mutant aspects that it highlights and explores in this story. And number 1 on the list of comic books from 1982 is Fantastic Four number 245, written and drawn by John Byrne. Now this comic book right here has the distinction of being the comic that started my uninterrupted run on the Fantastic Four. From number 245 onward, I did not miss a single issue of the Fantastic Four. Whether I got it off through the mail or off the rack, I read and collected the FF from this point. Now in this issue, Franklin Richards' powers begin to manifest themselves, with one of the effects being that his body grows older and he becomes an adult. And as usual with comic books, the status quo needs to be maintained, so at some point he reverts back to being his younger self. And before he reverts back to his normal age, he turns the Thing back into his Rocky form. At this point, the Thing looks more like his original form from the early days of the FF, and the reason he looked that way is in previous issues, Reed Richards had tried to cure him of being the Thing, and he only accomplished the task of kind of reverting him back to his original form. Now this book looks like it has a subscription crease right here, which means I may have gotten this book in the mail. I got a lot of books by subscription because going to gas stations, drugstores, grocery stores really was inconsistent about what they had on the rack, and if I really wanted to get something, I would probably ask for it for Christmas. My aunts and my uncles would give me subscriptions to comic books, and that way I would make sure I would get those issues. Now, I got a lot of books by subscription when I was younger, and because my family had a post office box, they usually didn't have to bend these comics, but this one may be one of the exceptions where this one had to be bended to get into the post office box. Our post office box was big enough to where they could just simply be placed in there flat, didn't have to be bent, but maybe we got a lot of mail that week and this one had to actually be folded to get in there. And there you have it, 10 books from my collection from 1982. Does anybody remember picking up books in 1982? What about movies, music, or TV from 1982? Anybody have any favorites of that? And what about any keys from 1982? I'd love to hear in the comments what you think might be a significant key from 1982. And until then, we'll see you around the comic rack.